Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Well, the weather outside is frightful, but the podcast is so delightful. This is Jesse Mayshark at Compass, bringing you again another episode of the Compass Points podcast, where we talk about Knoxville news, government, politics, education, business, whatever gets our attention. I am joined remotely this week by my colleague and Compass co-founder, co-publisher, Scott Barker. Scott, how are things over there on Coker Avenue?
Coker Avenue is fairly clear. Now, the side streets are a different story, but it's not bad. Coker is a connector street in the city's grand scheme of things, so they've kept it pretty clear. So it's not been bad. I've been out a couple of times for errands, like everyone else, and ready to, who can get out or who has been able to get out, getting to the store and that kind of thing. But it's not been horrible, except you get a little cabin fever. So,
yeah, for sure. Well, that is probably the main thing we're going to be talking about. This is not usually a weather-oriented podcast, but there are times where the weather moves from kind of being a sidebar to the news to being the news itself. And so we are certainly going to talk about the snowstorm that has essentially frozen us all in place for the most part this week. A couple of other things to hit on as well. Evaluation of Superintendent Jon Rysewyk by the school board. The conclusion of the protracted sale of Pilot Flying J to Berkshire Hathaway. But Scott, the main thing we have to talk about, obviously, this week is the snow. This storm, I've seen it variously referred to. I think it's at least the largest storm system to hit Knoxville in 30 years. I've seen a couple of people referring back to January of 1996, when we had a somewhat similar storm that didn't quite have the same, I think that was more 4 to 8 inches. And I think this week we got well over 8 inches, up toward 10 inches. But let's talk through it. Since we don't have a lot else to talk about. Of course, there were forecasts of this storm last weekend. As always, when you hear the forecast of a storm that could be bad, I think we all paid attention to that, but you never know what it's going to be like till it gets here. Like, we've certainly had times in the past where there's a bad storm forecast and it goes a little bit north of us or a little bit south of us. This one plowed right through us. In fact, it was kind of interesting if you looked at the snowfall totals. Of course, it kind of started Sunday night, continued through the day Monday. Monday was when we really got the heaviest snowfall into Tuesday night, and did give us, at least in some parts of Knox County, 9 inches or more by the time that phase of it was done. Of course, we've gone through sort of multiple phases of the weather here, because then it got very cold Wednesday night and kind of froze everything, and warmed up a little bit on Thursday. But now we're taping this on Friday morning, And we're looking ahead to, again, extremely cold temperatures over the weekend, which means that a lot of what we've accumulated this week is going to carry over into this coming week and will, probably slowly dissipate as the temperatures creep upward. But Scott, I guess the first thing to talk about is just the immediate response to the storm. You mentioned being on a connector street. I am on a neighborhood street here in Knoxville, just across Broadway from you, but we have not seen a snowplow because that's how the snow plans work. These are the times that we all get reminded what level of street we live on. So let's talk about the city and county's response. How did the city of Knoxville fare in contending with all of this?
Well, as you said, this was in the forecast. It wasn't a surprise. A little bit more than most people expected, but it was. The National Weather Service was saying, upwards of, 5 to 7 inches of snow. So it wasn't unexpected. So what the city went ahead and initiated their snow plan on Sunday. They started going out and putting down a brine solution on the roadways, which is kind of standard pre-treatment of the main corridors and connector streets. They have 3 levels of streets in the city, as you know, but they're the main corridors, and those are the top priority. Obvious ones: Kingston Pike, Chapman Highway, Western Avenue, those streets, and the streets around hospitals. So those are level 1 streets. Level 2 streets are connectors. Obviously, from the name of them, they run between those corridors. And then you have neighborhood streets, and neighborhood streets are the last ones to get treated. But anyway, so they started treating on Sunday, and the snow started coming down. They started going out and putting down salt once the snow started building up, and then and plowing and doing that sort of thing. It takes down the snow. It snowed all day long Monday, and there's just they had they weren't capable of keeping up with the snow, but they were able to keep the roads fairly passable for emergency use. I think is the best way to put it. It wasn't. And then eventually they had to switch over because salt only is effective down to around 20 degrees, and below that they have to add chlorine solution to it to make it more effective. But even then, once you get down into the single digits, nothing works. Mm-hmm. So they went through most of their salt stockpile and ordered more. They've gotten more in case they need more salt over this weekend and get through. But the police department went on their snow plan, which is one of the big things is they, instead of having one officer in one vehicle, they have 2 officers per vehicle. Kind of cuts down on the number of vehicles out there. They didn't respond to non-emergency calls, most non-emergency calls. A lot of cars on the side of the road that they went and checked to see if somebody was there, and most of them they weren't. The people had just abandoned their cars after they slid off the road. They marked them and moved on so that everybody would know that, nobody was trapped in there or anything. So, it was very frustrating, I think, for a lot of people because, around here, most of these snowfalls, as you mentioned, this is the biggest one we've had since 96. Most of the snows here are, a couple inches, easy to deal with, gone in a day or two. This one was a little bit more intense than that.
Hey, I'm going to add something real quick, guys, so that in my history in Knoxville, that I think's the important distinction, I suppose, about this storm is we didn't start with rain. a lot of the storms we've had in the past, we start with rain, and that really screws up that brine solution start they do. And so I think that's really helped out in the effectiveness of the road treatment that they've had in the way this storm came through as snow and cold only instead of starting with rain. So anything preparatory they tried to do usually gets washed off. And so I'm pleased with the response personally in my dealings with trying to travel in this kind of mess in the past in Knoxville. But I think they've done a really good job of trying to stay ahead of it in my travels through and having to run errands and do my sort of things. Like you said, it's not pretty, it's not easy, and if you don't have to, you shouldn't. But if you really have to, I've seen some cars that really shouldn't be out doing pretty well in what's going on right now.
Yeah, well, and I think that's a good point about the that brine solution can get washed away by rain, and that's often a frustration in these. And we at least didn't have that. We've had all sorts of other weather events this week. The county response, very similar to the city response. I think they started brining on Saturday. Of course, the county has some more far-flung roads than the city to get to. They also used a good chunk of their salt stockpile, although I believe the county started with about 5,000 tons of salt and the city started with about 2,000. So the county had a little bit more saved up to start with, has not had to make that call for extra supplies that the city has. But very similar approach, getting the major roads cleared and the connector roads. And, by Tuesday and into Wednesday, started seeing things on social media from people saying, where's my, our subdivision hasn't had a snowplow. Well, in most cases, your subdivision is not going to get a snowplow. And I think people don't necessarily understand the snow plan because it doesn't get put into effect very often. We don't get these kind of large snows, and most of the kinds of snows, like you were saying, Scott, that we get often come and go relatively quickly. And this reminds me, I grew up in Western New York, and, in the 1970s, we had some legendary winters, and, it would snow in November. And it was kind of this pattern where you get that first snow, but then it doesn't warm up enough to melt that first snow by the time you get the next storm and the next one. And that, if anybody here is curious and hasn't experienced this, that is how you can go from November until February or March without ever seeing the ground, which is something that I experienced sometimes as a kid. Here, I think we're only going to have it on the ground for, who knows exactly, a week to 10 days. But that's way longer than we usually have snow on the ground in Knoxville. We just don't see this very much. And so I think people were maybe a little surprised that snowplow didn't show up on their road the next day. But the thing is, in order to have the level of capacity to respond in a way that would allow either the city or county to plow every street immediately, they would have to gear up and staff up at a level that they might only need every 10, 20, or 30 years. I mean, these are the decisions that get made during budget time. But of course, their goal is to be ready for things that happen, but to have the resources to respond in the way that people would maybe like to see to something like this would require an investment that just probably wouldn't make sense most of the time.
Yeah, we would spend 9 out of 10 years talking about wasteful government spending and employees sitting around in the winter with nothing to do, and a fleet of vehicles that is way too large for what is needed, that sort of thing. So, it's been a difficult time for a lot of people, but these kinds of storms always are. And it's not business as usual in a storm like this in Tennessee.
Yeah. So. Right. Well, so the result of all of this, of course, was everything shut down, basically, and not everything. In fact, lots of businesses have stayed open to one degree or another to the extent that they're able to get staff to come in. And really, once you get, by Tuesday, certainly by Wednesday, once you get out of those local neighborhoods and subdivisions, if you were able to, the connector streets and the main roads were, they weren't great. You still had to drive carefully, but certainly people were able and have been able to get out and about. And so it's not that literally everything closed. On the civic side, pretty much everything closed. Of course, we had an advantage here in the sense that the storm hit on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And so everything was already closed on the day of the worst storm. And that probably did a lot of favors for people. Nobody had to make a call to close schools that day or close government offices. They were already closed. And so it was relatively easy for them to just carry that over and say, okay, the school system, everybody kind of initially said, all right, we're going to be definitely closed on Tuesday. Schools went ahead, closed Tuesday, Wednesday. By the time we got to Wednesday, the schools looked at then that subsequent wave of cold and wintry mix, and then cold again coming through, and just said, you know what, we're just going to stay closed for the rest of the week. That's effectively what happened with most government offices. I think the city county building did open on Thursday, but not many offices were open. Most county offices stay closed throughout. City offices reopened to a limited degree on Thursday, but then closed again on Friday. This has basically just been, we went from having a snow day on Tuesday to essentially we've had a snow week. In terms of anything kind of happening in civic life.
Yeah, like in the city, of course, trash and recycling pickup was suspended, essentially. Now you have to, they're saying that you just wait till your regular pickup day the coming week and do it then. I get where I am, our trash gets picked up on Fridays. So, I still have to wait till Friday to to put my bin out and get it taken away. It's going to be full. The Knoxville area transit, they were on a what they call a severe snow schedule for their routes. They where they only service the main corridors: Kingston Pike, Western, Broadway, Magnolia Avenue, Chapman Highway, and they were on that for a while. Then they just suspended operations altogether. Then they restarted on the severe snow schedule, and just Friday announced they were just going to once again cancel all services. So that's been on again, off again, bus service. Obviously being, vehicles on the road with people transporting people, they would, to do that out of an abundance of caution. So, it's been a real, almost every aspect of life here has been touched by, by this. So. And,
of course, government agencies were attempting to provide emergency services. We talked about obviously clearing the roads and everything, but Scott, a major focus this week for both kind of the public and nonprofit sector has been our homeless population and, the importance of people having a place to go to get off the street. So there's been a real effort around warming centers that were set up at 3 area churches, right?
Yeah, this was an effort coordinated by the relatively new city county office of housing stability, and they had three churches: Magnolia Avenue United Methodist, Vestal United Methodist, and Cokesbury Church in West Knoxville, to open up parts of their facilities for people who are experiencing homelessness who don't normally go to shelters. We're talking about the people who are in the encampments that pop up, in kind of nooks and crannies of the city and the county, And these are people who, for whatever reason, don't go to shelters. And the idea was to, on the coldest days and nights, and only the coldest nights, they would be open for temporary overnight accommodations. And of course, everyone's going to rely on volunteers to staff and to provide food and that sort of thing. Well, the storm was pretty heavy. Volunteers had a hard time getting to these places, and really, especially on Wednesday when the temperatures got down around 0 or lower, they were overwhelmed. They had more than 200 people, and the original capacity was going to be about 125 between the three sites. Traditional shelters were full too. Salvation Army opened up its gymnasium for people. So it was really did get a lot of attention, and rightly so. I mean, that was some of the temperatures got down to the point where it'd be very easy for someone to freeze to death if they were out in the elements. There were companies that provided food. Panera provided baked goods a couple of days for the people staying at these centers. And this is the first year they've done anything like this. And, I think that given the response, I think that they really met a critical need, in a really tough situation.
Yeah, they picked a good year to start for sure. And of course, you can't reach everybody. And there's at least one so far unconfirmed report, but seems well sourced from people who knew her, that at least one member of our local homeless population, a woman who many of us have seen around downtown for years and years and years, may have passed away from the cold one night. So obviously it was, temperatures really were at life-threatening levels this week.
And unfortunately, given a couple of facts, the fact that the encampments are in out of the way places and you don't always know where they are, and people are hard to reach. And we've had snow, people aren't out as much. There may be others who have passed as well. We just don't know yet. It's one of those things that does happen in snowstorms like this. And it's the centers will be open. We're open over the weekend. So these warming centers, and I think that their big problem. I don't know if they weren't ready for the number of people they had. That really were dependent on a lot of donations for food and other items as well. So it's been a huge effort, and will be going on as long as these temperatures are below freezing for the most part. So.
Right. Well, and of course, one of the questions coming into this was how well our grid would hold up, because I think we all remember not too long ago, December 2022, we had some very cold days that led to, first of all, some TVA production facilities energy production facilities actually freezing and losing some capacity, which led to rolling blackouts, which is never something you want to have when it's really cold outside. How did the grid hold up?
It held up very well. TVA spent about $123 million since those rolling blackouts. A lot of that was spent on those were all upgrades to the facilities. A lot of it went to basically insulating and protecting their generating units. They lost about 16% of their generating units in December 2022 And that loss of capacity plus record demand pretty much is what the cause of the rolling blackouts were. And that and other usually they can buy power from other utilities in these situations like this, but the other utilities throughout the Southeast were having the same problem. So it was a really I hate to use the phrase perfect storm, but it was this year. Apparently that work production, the capacity stayed high. We had Wednesday night had record power demand, and we didn't have rolling blackouts and things like that. They did ask people to conserve in their electricity usage, which on social media it led to all kinds of speculation about the return of rolling blackouts and that sort of thing. But the grid held up.
And also some responses I saw on social media from people who were just mad that they were being asked to make any accommodations at all. This is what you're here for, to provide us with energy and whatever. And I mean, that's true, obviously. But from the consumer side, I think it's probably also good to recognize when you're in an exceptional situation and, that the grid and the capacity of it, because they did hit, I think, another record level of demand when, coming into Wednesday morning when it was so cold. And again, for them to be ready and able to fire up that was a record level of demand, right? So anytime you have a record level of demand, that is almost certainly going to stress your existing capacity, because your capacity is built around normal demand with some, leeway up and down, obviously. But you're not going to have an entirely separate power generating plant that's just sitting there ready for a once every 10, 20, 30 year storm. And so, I thought that some of the responses I saw from people, the churlish responses I saw from people on social media seemed a little bit at odds with, you can't expect when you have a weather disaster, which, I don't know if this technically qualifies as a disaster, but it's something that absolutely affected every part of life. You're probably going to have to make some accommodations. And so if the utility asks you to maybe turn down the temperature by a couple of degrees and put on a sweater, there are a lot worse positions you could be in than that, let's say.
Very much so. And I think part of that is it's almost like when you go to social media, and that's where people go to vent. Yeah. They don't mutter to themselves anymore. They go on social media and vent. And people were frustrated. They couldn't, a lot of people that couldn't leave their houses. So if you can't leave your house, your power goes out, they're all, so there was a lot of venting that went on. And, but by and large, what few power outages that I saw occurred during the week were small, isolated, kind of routine, almost routine outages, if you will. Now, we're taping this on Friday, and we've got another round of extreme cold coming in, and maybe ice. So, and ice, you can, limbs fall on power lines, that sort of thing. But those are kind of normal. I don't think that at least the grid will be tested again. And but if Wednesday's experience was precedent setting, then the grid should be fine.
Well, you talked about people venting on social media. One of the people who people vented about on social media this week was Knox County Mayor Glenn Jacobs, because it transpired that when the storm actually hit on Monday, Jacobs was not in Knoxville. And he didn't hide this. He posted things on social media. about this. He was in Iowa. I think he flew up there the Saturday before the storm hit and got back to town. His flight was kind of delayed by the weather, but he got back on Tuesday, and he was up there stumping for former President Donald Trump at a rally in Iowa. And then he stayed there through the Iowa caucuses, the primary caucuses, which of course Trump won. And Jacobs has endorsed Trump. This is not a new position for him. And it raised questions among some people, and especially among Knox County Democrats, about whether he was being a responsible leader, being out of town when this huge storm hits. His staff said that it was no issue. They were able to be in touch with him throughout. And of course, also, again, we talked about their snow plan. They have a plan for how to address these things. They don't need the mayor's sign off on it or anything. It's not like, you can't fire up the snow equipment until the mayor says go. I mean, they all kind of know what they're doing, even without him being here. But they said he was very involved and checking in all the time. And, certainly these days, as long as you are able to get decent cell phone service, somebody being out of town doesn't necessarily mean you can't reach them or talk to them. But of course, this is one of those sort of low-hanging political fruit things where something happens and somebody's out of town, and their political opponents in particular, jump on it and say, and we hear this like every presidential administration, the president ends up being on vacation while something happens. And so the other party then comes out and says, Ukraine's been invaded and Joe Biden's at the beach or whatever. It's just kind of the normal course of things is I guess the way I see it. My view on this is a little bit colored by my own experience because I worked for the city of Knoxville, and my boss, Mayor Rohero, traveled a fair amount, as mayors often do. They get invited to conferences. They have to go to Washington, D.C. to meet with officials. I mean, there's lots of reasons for mayors to travel. And among other things, I remember the last McClung warehouse fire happened while the mayor was not just out of town, but out of the country. She was in Turkey on a trip that had been arranged by the U.S. State Department. She was over there talking about democracy in Turkey. And, that was no obstacle to us in the city responding to that fire. And we actually called her as it was happening, at like 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. or whatever, got her on the phone in Turkey immediately. And again, it's not like you actually need the mayor on site to direct the fire response. The fire department does that. They probably wouldn't want the mayor on site while they're responding to a fire. There was talk about it. The Democratic Party, I think, felt like they issued a press release about it on Tuesday I don't actually remember if it was Tuesday or Wednesday. Tuesday, I think. And got some traction with it on social media. So they came back on Wednesday with another press release, this one from City Councilwoman Debbie Helsley, Knoxville City Councilwoman Debbie Helsley, who's also secretary of the County Democratic Party. And she ran against Jacobs for county mayor in 2022. And she took the opportunity to say, he's an absentee leader. And this is typical of him putting his own political interests, kind of implying that he was looking for endorsement from Trump for any future endeavors that he might undertake, which actually Trump did give him. He said that they should elect this guy governor, or words to that effect. If Jacobs does run for governor, he may have Trump support, although I will say anybody who's counting on any kind of constancy from Donald Trump on anything, I wouldn't put a ton of eggs in that basket. But regardless, Scott, I do feel like this is one of those things that is more about optics than about governing. It definitely doesn't look great when somebody it's like musical chairs. You happen to be out of town when something bad happens. But I don't know how much actual effect it has on, actual government services being provided to anybody.
Yeah. And then Jacobs gets back on Tuesday. On Wednesday, Knoxville City Mayor India Kincannon left town. She went to D.C. for a U.S. Conference of Mayors gathering there and talking to administration officials and that sort of thing. And as you mentioned earlier, being out of town doesn't mean you're out of touch. You can, and her staff said basically the same thing that Jacob's staff said. We're in touch with her constantly. She knows what's going on. We're giving her briefings. She can give us direction. It's not, the mayor travels a lot. She goes to D.C. I shouldn't say frequently, but I mean, it's not once or twice a year. I think she goes to D.C. So it's not, and she, used to live there. So, it really, in this day and time, especially, is not that big of a deal to be gone as long as you are in touch. I think one of the things, optics wise that you talked about is Jacob's trip was obviously a purely political trip, whereas Kincannon, you can say, well, she's doing the city's business in D.C. and she, for what we understand, she has been. And so there's you can say that there's a key difference there, but really when you get down to it, both of them, I mean, being the mayor of a city or a county the size of Knox County is a full-time job wherever, there's really not, vacations are not really part of the deal.
You're never really off the clock.
You might be out of but that's the thing you talk about presidents and everything. People say, oh well, he's taken more vacations than any president in history or whoever it is. And you hear that about every president. And the thing about it is they don't go off by themselves to some remote spot where nobody can find them. They're with Secret Service and aides and everything else. I mean, it's not. That's part of the deal when you're an elected official at a fairly high level.
Right. Yeah, and that's not to say that it's never a legitimate issue if you have somebody who's out of town, all the time, or if you didn't have a mayor around the office ever, that would start to become a problem. Mayors do need to be there. They need to sign pieces of paper. They need to, talk to people and so forth. So it's not like it would never be an issue, but or kind of happening to be out of town when something bad happens is more a matter of bad luck than anything else, really.
Yeah. And, it's not like, who was it a couple of years ago was on the Appalachian, or said they were on the Appalachian Trail or what. I mean, you don't go on those kinds of vacations where you are just completely out of touch. So take those trips. And that certainly wasn't the case for either mayor last week.
Yeah. And, Knox County Communications Director Mike Danila kind of tried to make the point that, well, this was kind of county business because Mayor Jacobs thinks it would be better for Knox County if Donald Trump were back in the White House. Maybe a bit of a rhetorical stretch there, although I'm sure Jacobs does in fact think that. But also worth noting, Jacobs did pay for, according to his office, he paid for that trip himself. It was not paid for by county taxpayers. And, we also got some response from people saying, well, it's worth pointing out that he was there to endorse a twice impeached, multiply indicted, serial lying sexual assaulter for president. And all of that is true. None of those facts are in dispute. But, we all know that. We know who Donald Trump is. Glenn Jacobs knows who Donald Trump is. And if he, on balance of all of those things, thinks that Donald Trump is still a better president, then, that's his opinion. And that's a political argument. It doesn't really have to do with how well he's governing Knox County. So anything else we want to mention about the storm, Scott? I mean, it's on the one hand, it's been, this big, huge thing that's disrupted everybody's lives, but it's also It's kind of straightforward. We got a whole bunch of snow and ice, and everybody mostly stayed home.
Yeah, it is pretty straightforward. And on the one hand, it has been a huge event for us locally, but we're, as we mentioned earlier, we're conditioned in East Tennessee for snowfalls of short duration, and we're all tired of it. We're ready for it to go. So we can move on to other things.
Right. Well, just a couple of other things to mention, and this is something that actually happened the previous week, but we didn't talk about it on last week's episode because I hadn't gotten around to writing about it yet. Knox County School Superintendent Jon Rysewyk received his first annual evaluation from the school board, something that's supposed to happen once a year. He actually went about 16 months or so, actually a little bit longer than that, I think, in office before they got to his first review, because his first year was only a partial year, and so they kind of wanted to let him get a little more time under his belt before they gave him a comprehensive evaluation. And overall, the board gave him, they had 15 objectives that they rated him on, having to do with everything from student academic performance to teacher recruitment and retention, just kind of all of the major things that they expect Rysewyk to do as superintendent of the third largest school system in the state. And they overall rated him a 4.1 on a scale of 5, which means that he performed above expectations. Anything over the level of 4 means he is above expectations. And that was, coincidentally or not, the same grade that Rysewyk gave himself on a self-evaluation that he completed and turned into the board. And there was an interesting range of scores on the individual school board members. They each rated him, and then all of that was, they took the median of all 9 scores, and that was a 4.1. If they had taken the average, the mean of all those scores, it would have actually been a 3.86, which would have put him in the category sort of, above performing at expectations is a 3.0. So a 3.86 would have still been above, but it wouldn't have reached that level of 4, which is the official above expectations level. Whether that makes a difference or not, School Board Chair Betsy Henderson said that a median is a better indicator of the overall feelings of the board, because it kind of protects you against having one really high or really low score throw things off, which can happen with a mean or average. But the interesting thing was his scores actually ranged from a 2.3 from school board member Jennifer Owen, who didn't like the evaluation system to start with, and she thought that it didn't set out specific enough goals, and that was one of her big complaints. Like, she thought the whole system was flawed, all the way up to a 5.0 from school board member Christy Christie. Now, Christy Christie was chair of the school board at the time they hired Rysewyk, and so you could say that maybe she feels a little bit more investment there. Owen voted against hiring Rysewyk and actually voted to start the search process all over back in 2022 when they hired him. And so, maybe she's inclined to be a little more skeptical. But overall, the school board, what was interesting to me was there were 5 board members who rated him a 4.0 or higher. And in that group, it was a mixed group, 3 Republicans, 1 independent, 1 Democrat. It included Daniel Watson, who was also one of the board members who did not vote to hire Rysewyk, but he still gave him I think 4.3. Reverend John Butler, Democrat who represents the first district, all the center city schools. He's been pretty happy with Rysewyk's approach to what they're now calling the Region 5 schools in that area and the strategic plan they've come up with for those schools. And so we have talked about the partisan divide on the school board, and that sometimes we come down to these 5-4 splits where it's like the 5 Republican members over here and the 2 Democrats and 2 independents over here. But that wasn't really how this broke down. And I think that it showed that Rysewyk, so far, he's obviously early in his tenure, but he does seem to be maintaining support from that board. And, Scott, we were talking about county elections the other week and how we're going to see a minimum of 3 new board members coming on this fall. And that's going to increase the number of people on the board who weren't here when Rysewyk got hired. And so for any superintendent, that's kind of always this ongoing challenge as one group of people hires you, and then there's ongoing turnover, and having to, kind of make all of those new people feel comfortable with your leadership and keep them happy. That's just kind of like a rolling challenge / opportunity for school superintendents. But for the moment, Rysewyk seems to basically have the confidence of the school board. Yeah,
though that's pretty decent score, for him, and you almost expect people in that type of position to get a fairly decent score as long as nothing bad happens. So that's the thing. He hasn't really had any type of catastrophe that he's had to deal with, whether self-inflicted.
No big scandals yet. I mean, there have been some small things that have happened here.
But I mean, routine. But usually it has to be a pretty major event for that to be an issue. And but like you said, he's early in his tenure. He's got plenty of time to mess up. So
yeah. Well, and so one sort of interesting effect of this is that his salary is set up in such a way that he receives $240,000 a year. That may be adjusted for inflation. I need to go back and check, but that's the base pay. And then he's eligible for up to a $10,000 bonus per year. And this was actually something Rysewyk negotiated. Initially, the school board was going to offer him $250,000 as a salary. And he suggested having it be $240,000 with the other $10,000 being sort of a performance bonus that he could earn based on his evaluation. And the way they've set this up is basically if he scores over a 4, he is eligible for some level of bonus. And what that is that he's eligible for an extra $1,000 for any 10th of a percentage point he is over 4. So he ended up with a 4.1. He gets an extra $1,000. It's not a lot on top of $240,000, but on the other hand, who's going to turn
$1,000?
That's right. Yeah. So that's the fiscal impact of that. Okay, and then we did have a little bit of business news happen this week too. Sort of the Pilot Flying J Haslam Warren Buffett saga. What happened?
Well, it essentially ended. The Haslam family and Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway came to an agreement on the price of the final Haslam family stake in Pilot Flying J. Pilot Flying J was founded by Jim Haslam, famously as one gas station in Virginia, and he and his family grew the business until it was the largest truck stop business company in the country. And started. Of course, Jim Haslam is in his 90s now. His older son Jimmy, who helped run the company for the most part for the last few years, has transitioned into being a sports franchise owner of the Cleveland Browns and other interests in sports teams. His other son Bill, of course, was the governor of Tennessee, and he also is in the sports ownership business now that he's no longer in office. So they decided to sell, and they sold to Berkshire Hathaway. The sale has been ongoing for several years. It started in 2017. and another chunk was sold in early last year. And the Berkshire Hathaway had an 80% stake in the company and had an option to buy the remaining 20% this year. Well, they got into a dispute because Berkshire Hathaway, since they controlled the company, changed the accounting methods. And I think you have to be an accountant to understand exactly what's going on. But the bottom line is the Haslam family thought it undervalued that remaining 20% of the company that they still owed if they were going to sell to Berkshire Hathaway. They said it was worth $3.2 billion. And Berkshire Hathaway's already paid $11 billion. They paid over those two transactions. It was $11 billion for the 80% of Pilot, and the family thought it was worth $3.2 billion before the accounting change. They sued. Berkshire Hathaway countersued. They were alleging that Jimmy Haslam had offered either bribes or improper payments to executives to boost the value of the company before the sale and all that. They settled the legal dispute a little more than a week ago, or 2 weeks ago, and then last week came to an agreement on the actual sale itself. So the Haslam family is no longer has an ownership stake in Pilot Flying J. It is wholly owned by Berkshire Hathaway. It's still headquartered in Knoxville. Berkshire Hathaway and Warren Buffett generally buy companies and just put them on. I don't want to say put them on autopilot, but they buy well-managed companies and let them keep doing what they do. Meanwhile, of course, the Haslam family, they're still here. Jim and Natalie Haslam have been huge community donors, philanthropists, and they're still going to be here and still do things like that as they can. But it is the end of a business era in Knoxville because as you well know, I mean, Jim Haslam's influence on the business community has been almost incalculable. Mm-hmm. So,
and on local politics and local nonprofits. You mentioned the philanthropy. There are a lot of things in town with the Haslams' name on it for money they've given, and there are a lot of other things in town that don't have the Haslams' name on it that have also benefited tremendously from their giving.
Yeah, the old saw about there were 12 white men who ran Knoxville back in the day. Well, it was always Jim Haslam and 11 other guys. You could argue the other guys, but not him. But he was very influential politically. He's been very influential business-wise with the especially with Leadership Knoxville, which mm-hmm. was his brainchild. And so many people have been through Leadership Knoxville and the contacts that they've made and everything else that's really shaped a lot of the business and civic life of Knoxville and Knox County over the past 3 decades or so. His influence has been enormous.
Yep. Also worth mentioning that this is the second sort of marquee East Tennessee company that Berkshire Hathaway has acquired, because of course they bought Clayton Homes, I think going on like 20 years ago at this point.
It's been a long time, but yeah, and again, I mean, that was another instance of Berkshire Hathaway buys a company and they control it, but they just kind of let it continue doing what it does. Yeah. And that's what they did with Clayton Homes. So there's no inkling that anything's going to change fundamentally locally about Pilot Flying J. That the headquarters is likely to remain here. There's not, it's not. They don't make huge changes like that when they typically make huge changes like that when they take over a company. So
right. So basically, all that happened this week was some extremely wealthy people came to terms on some transfer of funds between themselves.
One multi-billionaire wrote a check to another multi-billionaire family. So that's the world of high finance.
Yeah. All right. Well, sort of a short show this week because, as we said, just not very much has happened. We've all just kind of been sitting around waiting out the weather. But we have some things to look ahead to in the coming week, assuming that the weather is more cooperative. County Commission will meet on Monday. Commission canceled its monthly work session last Tuesday, and they're just not going to have a work session. They're going to go ahead and have their regular monthly voting meeting Monday evening at 5 o'clock in the main assembly room of the City County building. They will also have another thing that got canceled last week was an information session for commissioners on the advanced Knox process and the county growth policy plan, which of course we've been talking a lot about here. That meeting has been rescheduled to this coming Monday, I believe also at 2 p.m. in the main assembly room of the City County building, although I don't know that I've received yet a formal notice to that effect, just that it will be held that day, but I think it's going to be at 2 o'clock. And so that is the county commission side. And then, Scott, there's a couple of meetings coming up Tuesday as well.
Yeah, the City County Sports Authority is going to meet on Tuesday. It's their first meeting since September. They have not met, but they haven't really had to. There's not been a lot of change. They already did the financing. They already did all the stuff to get the construction of the new stadium going, and it's pretty much there's not been any real business they've had to conduct. So they've had scheduled meetings and they end up canceling them because there's no real business to conduct. But they are going to be meeting this week. I'm not sure exactly how much real business they're going to be conducting there. They are going to get an update on the internship program now, and the internship program is they're getting applications now. In fact, they were going to have one of those an internship fair, like a job fair, last week, but we had snow. But there are all kinds of internships available. They're going to get an update on that program. Also on the diversity and the contractors, we're going to get an update on that. Of course, that's been kind of an ongoing issue about trying to get up to 17% of the business with the construction of the stadium going to either minority, women, or veteran-owned businesses. And they're also going to update on the construction itself. And as if you have driven by the stadium site in the last month or so, you've been able to see that the bones of the grandstands are up, and you can kind of see that they are actually going to be building a stadium there. So anyway, that's going to be they're going to be meeting on Tuesday. City Council meets Tuesday evening. The big thing on the agenda is they are going to consider Mayor Kincannon's middle housing initiative that we've talked about many times on the podcast. It would make it easier to build duplexes and triplexes and small scale apartment buildings in the neighborhoods around downtown, the older neighborhoods inside the I-640 Beltway. They're going to be actually voting on that. It took 2 tries to get through the Planning Commission, but finally did, and so it's on Council's agenda for this week. And also, one thing is they're going to be buying fuel for the next year. spending $4 million on fuel, and I know they burned a lot of fuel this week, and last week in the snow plows and salt trucks. So they're going to be replenishing their fuel supply as well over the next year. And then on Thursday, council is going to be having a public hearing on emergency response and emergency services and alternative response. They're going to be looking at various models, apparently, and talking about what to do on that moving forward. It's not a non-voting meeting, but there will be plenty of discussion.
All right. Well, we will be back here next week to talk about all those things if they actually happen. we have a bunch of things that we expected to happen this past week, and they didn't. So we can't take anything for granted. But whatever happens in the coming week, we will be back next week to talk about. And I wanted to say that I did confirm there was a notice of that rescheduled information session for County Commission. Came through yesterday afternoon. That is going to be at 2 p.m. Monday in the main assembly room of the City County building to talk about Advanced Knox and the growth policy plan. Seth, anything you want to add this week?
Yes, actually. No, I'm trying to think. I have a personal plug, I guess. On the 25th, we are doing a collaboration with Central Cinema to do a special airing of Goonies, dinner and the movie and dessert and special trivia with us. We're really excited. We've been trying to put something together with Central Cinema with our pirate theme. And so the 25th, it's going to be, I can't remember the pricing offhand, but for one fairly low price, you'll get dinner, movie, trivia, dessert, all in the fun pirate, and then into Central Cinema for an airing of Goonies, because everybody loves Goonies. Quick aside on the Goonies story. It was my mom's favorite movie when we were kids, but she never saw it outside of it being on like TNT or whatever. And so for 1 year from Christmas, my sister bought it for my mom on DVD. And I think the first official line of the movie is Chunk cussing. And my mom didn't like it. I don't think my mom's watched the movie since.
So that had been cut out of the TV edit.
Yeah, it's because it starts with the car chase, right? And then he presses his shake up against the window, watching the car chase go by, and he says, "Holy," and my mom didn't go for that at all. But yeah, be safe out there. It's been a crazy week. I grew up in Wisconsin, so this is not weird weather to me. But it's weird terrain to me because in Wisconsin, it's flat and straight. We had the road crews. We had all that stuff. So we never cared about snow. Probably not dissimilar to your time in New York. And so, for the most part, I've seen pretty much everybody's been acting like they should. So just be careful out there and don't be in a hurry. I think that's the number one thing that my dad taught me when you're driving in the snow or the wet or the ice or whatever. Just don't be in a hurry. Don't change your mind quickly, because that's when you get in the most trouble.
Yeah, amen to that. All right. Well, we will be back next week to talk to you all. And thanks, as always, to Seth for his production work remotely this week there at Barbarian Productions. Theme music is by Will Wright. Everybody stay warm and safe. We'll talk to you soon.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.